Beneath the icy Arizona moonlight, a rancher cradles his scorched dog amidst blazing ruins, tears streaking silently as its tail gives a frail wag. But what if the real enemy isn't the cartel, but a secret buried beneath his floorboards? A wolf symbol carved into a dead cow's hide hints at a plot darker than murder, leaving you wondering, will this hero save the valley or ignite its doom? With a shattered heart and shocking truths unraveling, this tale will grip you tight. Subscribe now to catch every twist. The Arizona night stretched endless and cold over Santa Rosa Valley, a vast canvas of shadows pierced only by the faint silver glow of a waning moon. At Dusty Hollow Ranch, Jack Spectre Sullivan stood on his weathered porch, calloused hands resting on the railing as his sharp gray eyes scanned the horizon. The air carried the familiar scent of sagebrush and cattle, but tonight something else lingered, a metallic tang, sharp and wrong. Beside him, Phantom, Blaze, and Vanguard sat like sentinels, their sleek Belgian Malinois frames taut with alertness, ears twitching at every rustle in the darkness. 25 years hunting smugglers and traffickers along the border had honed Jack's instincts to a razor's edge, and now, retired to this quiet life of raising prize cattle, those instincts screamed. Trouble was near. It started with a sound, a single muffled crack echoing from the western fence line, too deliberate to be a coyote's snap or a branch breaking under the wind. Jack's hand tightened around the old service pistol at his hip, its weight a familiar comfort from his border patrol days. "Phantom, Scout," he murmured, his voice low but firm. The lead dog, black as midnight with eyes that gleamed like polished obsidian, slipped into the shadows without a sound, moving with the silent precision Jack had drilled into him over a decade of tactical missions. Blaze and Vanguard stayed at his side, their breaths steady, waiting for the signal only he could give. Minutes later, Phantom returned, his muzzle brushing Jack's leg, a signal of completion. Jack crouched, following the dog's gaze toward the cattle pens. The herd was restless, lowing softly, their hooves shifting the dust in uneasy patterns. Then he saw it. A steer lying motionless near the fence, its flank glistening wet under the moonlight. Jack approached, boots crunching on the dry earth, and knelt beside the animal. Blood pooled beneath it, dark and thick, but what stopped his breath wasn't the bullet hole through its skull. It was the mark carved into its hide. A crude wolf, etched with a blade, its jagged lines taunting him like a signature. His stomach twisted. This wasn't a random kill. This was a message. The radio on his belt crackled to life, shattering the silence. "Jack, you copy?" It was Tom Rivera, his nearest neighbor, his voice tight with panic. "They hit me last night. 40 head of cattle gone. Sheriff's useless, says it's federal jurisdiction. Jack, they're coming for us all." Jack's jaw clenched as he pressed the receiver. "Who's they, Tom?" A pause, then a whisper. "Cartel. Kaloa Noa Generacion. Word is they want the valley for their routes." Jack ended the call, his mind racing. He'd heard of them. Ruthless, militarized, a new breed of border criminals who didn't just smuggle drugs, but claimed territory like a conquering army. And now they'd set their sights on Santa Rosa. He stood, brushing the dust from his jeans, and turned to the dogs. "Perimeter check," he ordered, his tone clipped. Blaze and Vanguard fanned out, their muscular forms disappearing into the night with the same lethal grace that had once made them the terror of smugglers from Nogales to El Paso. Jack didn't follow. He stayed by the dead steer, staring at that wolf symbol, its meaning gnawing at him. Was it a warning, a claim, or something personal? His past as Spectre, the Border Patrol's ghost handler, wasn't a secret to everyone. Whispers still lingered among old colleagues and enemies alike. Had someone from those days tipped off the cartel? The dogs returned, their stillness confirming the ranch was secure, for now. Jack's mind drifted to the cattle, his life's work after leaving the service. Each animal was a testament to years of careful breeding, a legacy he'd built when the adrenaline of tactical ops faded into memory. Losing even one stung, but this wasn't about loss, it was about control. The cartel didn't just want his livestock, they wanted his land, his will, his surrender. He wouldn't give it. A truck's rumble broke his thoughts, headlights slicing through the dust as it rolled up the access road. Jack recognized the battered Ford. It was Tom Rivera, his weathered face etched with exhaustion as he climbed out. "They left a note," Tom said, holding up a crumpled paper. "Cooperate or burn." "Jack, they're not stopping." Jack took the note, his fingers tracing the scrawled words. "They hit you first because you're closest to the border," he said, handing it back. "Mine's next." "It's a pattern." Tom's eyes darted to the dogs, then back to Jack. "You gonna call the sheriff? Get the feds involved?" Jack shook his head, a bitter edge to his voice. "Laura Bennett's got no manpower, and the feds won't move until bodies pile up. I've seen this game before, Tom. They'll bleed us dry while the bureaucrats argue jurisdiction." Tom frowned, uneasy. "So what, you just gonna take them on alone? You and those dogs?" Jack met his gaze, unflinching. "I've handled worse with less." That was the truth, or part of it. Jack didn't tell Tom about the nights he'd tracked cartel scouts through deserts with nothing but his K9S and a knife, or the missions that earned him his call sign. He didn't mention the faces he'd buried in his memory, enemies and innocents alike, casualties of a war that never ended. Tom didn't need to know that Spectre wasn't just a nickname, it was a ghost that still haunted him, and maybe now it was waking up. As Tom drove off, Jack returned to the porch, the wolf symbol burning in his mind. He could fortify the ranch, arm the neighbors, call in old favors, but something told him this was bigger than cattle rustling. The cartel wasn't testing him, they were hunting him. And that mark? It felt like a taunt from someone who knew his past, someone who wanted him to break cover. Phantom pressed against his leg, a low growl rumbling in his chest as if sensing the storm brewing. Jack ran a hand through the dog's dense fur, murmuring, "We've got work to do, boy." The night deepened around Dusty Hollow, the moon sinking behind the foothills, and in that quiet, Jack made his choice. He wouldn't wait for the cartel to strike again. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that the first move had already been made, and it wasn't from the shadows across the border, but from within the valley itself. The sun rose over Santa Rosa Valley, painting the jagged foothills in hues of amber and gold, but at Dusty Hollow Ranch the dawn brought no peace. Jack Sullivan stood in the cattle pen, the air still thick with the coppery stench of the steer's blood. Its wolf-carved hide a grim reminder of the night before. Phantom paced beside him, his black coat catching the light as his keen nose sniffed the ground, searching for traces the wind hadn't yet erased. Blaze and Vanguard flanked the perimeter, their disciplined strides a silent promise of vigilance. Jack's mind churned. Tom Rivera's warning, the cartel's boldness, that damned symbol, all pieces of a puzzle he couldn't yet solve. But he wouldn't face it alone. By mid-morning, the porch of Dusty Hollow buzzed with the low murmur of voices as the valley's ranchers gathered at Jack's call. Tom Rivera sat hunched in a chair, his weathered hands clutching the cartel's note, eyes hollow from a sleepless night. Beside him stood Henry Brooks, a wiry man with a nervous tick in his jaw, his teenage daughter's safety the only tether keeping him from collapse. Two others joined them, Ron Taylor, a grizzled widower from the Eastern Valley, and James Peterson, whose barn still smelled of soot from a fire he barely put out last week. These were Jack's neighbors, his community, bound by the hardscrabble life of the borderlands. Today they looked to him not as a rancher, but as Spectre, the ghost who'd once tamed chaos. "We can't wait for them to pick us off," Jack said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. He leaned against the railing, arms crossed, the pistol at his hip a quiet threat. "They've hit Tom, tested me. They're not stealing cattle, they're claiming territory. We fortify, we coordinate, or we lose everything." Tom nodded, crumpling the note in his fist. "I've got Danny to think about, my grandson. I'll do whatever it takes." Henry shifted uneasily, his eyes darting to the dogs. "And if they come with guns?" "We're not soldiers, Jack." Jack met his gaze steady and unyielding. You don't need to be. You just need to hold your ground. The plan was simple: shared patrols, encrypted radios, signal flares for emergencies. Jack would train them to watch, to listen, to make their ranches hard targets. The dogs would be their edge, Phantom's tracking, Blaze's diversions, Vanguard's containment. As they hashed out details, Jack noticed Henry lingering near the door, his hands stuffed in his pockets, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool breeze. Something was off. "Henry," Jack called, keeping his tone casual, "grab that map from my truck, will you?" Henry nodded too quickly and shuffled out, leaving Jack to watch his retreat with narrowed eyes. Minutes later, as the group dispersed, Jack slipped into the yard, Phantom at his heels. He found Henry by the truck, fumbling with a glove box, a scrap of paper slipping from his pocket to the dirt. Before Henry could snatch it back, Phantom lunged, pinning it under his paw with a low growl. Jack picked it up, his blood running cold as he read the scrawl. Sullivan. X3 dogs, ex-SPP. Dangerous. The handwriting was shaky, but the intent was clear. A dossier. A betrayal. He turned to Henry, who froze, guilt flooding his face like a cornered animal's. "Explain," Jack said, his voice a quiet storm. Henry's knees buckled and he sank against the truck, hands trembling. "They came last week, 2 men in a black SUV. Said they'd take my girl if I didn't talk." "I didn't want this, Jack. I swear. I just gave them basics, nothing big." Jack's grip tightened on the paper, crumpling it in his fist. "Basics? They carved a wolf into my steer last night, Henry. They knew where to hit." Henry's eyes welled up, his voice breaking. "I had no choice. You don't know what it's like, having her life on the line." For a moment, Jack stood silent, the weight of Henry's words crashing against the fury boiling in his chest. He'd seen fear twist men before, smugglers spilling secrets under pressure, colleagues cracking on the border, but this was different. This was home. Phantom pressed against his leg, sensing the shift, and Jack forced his breathing to steady. "You sold me out to save her," he said finally, his tone flat. "Did they promise to leave you alone?" Henry nodded, tears streaking his dust-caked cheeks. "They said 1 report, and we'd be safe." Jack stepped closer, towering over him. "And you believed them? Cartels don't keep promises. They take what they want and burn the rest. You've painted a target on us all." Henry sobbed, clutching his head. "What was I supposed to do, let them take her?" Jack didn't answer. He turned away, the paper still in his hand, and walked back to the house, Phantom trailing like a shadow. The sting of betrayal cut deeper than any blade. He'd trusted Henry, taught him how to mend fences, shared beers on this very porch. Now, that trust was ash. Inside, Jack tossed the note onto the table where Tom sat, his face darkening as he read it. "Henry?" Tom whispered, disbelief lacing his voice. "He's been coming to my place asking about you, said he admired your setup." Jack's jaw tightened. He was scouting. The realization hit Tom like a punch, and he slammed a fist on the table. "We've got a snake in our own yard, and they're closing in because of it." That afternoon, a black SUV rolled slowly past Dusty Hollow's gate, its tinted windows hiding the faces inside. Jack watched from the porch, Blaze and Vanguard stiffening beside him as Phantom darted to the fence line, tracking the vehicle's path. It didn't stop, but its message was clear. They were watching, waiting, emboldened by the intel Henry had fed them. Jack's radio crackled. "Tom again." "Jack, they hit Peterson's place an hour ago, took half his herd, left a wolf mark on his barn door, same as yours." Jack's grip on the radio tightened. "They're testing us, seeing who breaks." He ended the call and turned to the dogs, his voice a steel thread. "Phantom, perimeter lock. Blaze, Vanguard, with me." As they moved out, Jack's mind raced. Henry's betrayal wasn't just a personal wound. It was a breach that could doom the valley, but what gnawed at him most was the wolf symbol. It wasn't random. Someone in the cartel knew him, knew Spectre, and they were playing a game he hadn't yet figured out. The day faded into dusk, and Jack stood alone on the porch, the crumpled note in his pocket like a weight. He could confront Henry, expose him, rally the others, but what then? A man desperate enough to sell out a friend might do worse under pressure, and what of the cartel's next move? The valley was fracturing and Jack was its linchpin, whether he wanted to be or not. The stars glittered cold and distant above Dusty Hollow Ranch as Jack Sullivan worked under the faint glow of a lantern, reinforcing the cattle pen's fences with steel wire. The valley had fallen silent since Henry Brooks' betrayal, a fragile calm that felt more like the hush before a storm than any real peace. Phantom patrolled the perimeter, his black silhouette weaving through the sagebrush, while Vanguard stood guard near the barn, ears pricked for any sound. Blaze, ever the restless one, stayed close to Jack, his tawny coat brushing against Jack's leg with every step, a loyal shadow unwilling to stray far since the cartel's first strike. Jack's hands moved with practiced efficiency, but his mind was elsewhere, tangled in the wolf symbol, Henry's tear-streaked confession, and the creeping dread that he couldn't protect everyone. The attack came without warning. A sudden roar split the night. Flames erupted from the cattle barn, a wall of orange and red swallowing the dry timber in seconds. Jack dropped the wire, the clang lost in the crackling inferno, and sprinted toward the blaze, his heart hammering like a war drum. "Blaze, with me! Vanguard, Vanguard, secure the line!" he barked, voice raw over the fire's hungry growl. The dog snapped into action. But Blaze hesitated, his amber eyes fixed on the barn where the cattle lowed in panic, trapped behind locked gates. Before Jack could stop him, Blaze bolted inside, a streak of muscle and fur disappearing into the smoke. "Blaze, no!" Jack shouted, lunging after him, but the heat slammed into him like a fist, forcing him back. Through the haze, he saw Blaze tugging at the gate's rope with his teeth, freeing the herd as they stampeded past him toward safety. The roof groaned, beams snapping under the fire's weight, and Jack's stomach dropped as he realized the truth. Blaze wasn't coming out. Without a second thought, he grabbed a soaked bandana from the water trough, tied it over his face, and plunged into the furnace. The air inside was a choking miasma of ash and heat, searing his lungs with every breath. Flames licked the walls, curling around the hay bales like serpents, and the cattle's cries faded as they escaped. Jack stumbled through the chaos, eyes streaming, until he spotted Blaze, pinned beneath a fallen beam, his left leg splayed at an unnatural angle, fur blackened and singed. The dog's chest heaved, but his jaws still gripped the rope, refusing to let go even as the fire closed in. "Hold on, boy," Jack rasped, dropping to his knees. He shoved the beam with all his strength, muscles screaming as it shifted just enough to free Blaze. Scooping the dog into his arms, Jack staggered back toward the door, the roof collapsing behind them in a thunderous crash. They burst into the cool night air, Jack collapsing to the dirt with Blaze cradled against his chest. The dog's breathing was shallow, his whimpers cutting through the roar of the blaze like a knife through Jack's heart. "You're okay! You're okay!" Jack whispered, though the lie tasted bitter. Blaze's leg was a ruin, charred skin peeling back to reveal raw flesh, the bone beneath twisted and useless. Blood matted his fur, and his amber eyes, always so fierce, now glimmered with a quiet trust that broke Jack apart. He pressed his forehead to Blaze's, tears carving tracks through the soot on his face. "You're my hero, boy. Don't you dare leave me." Phantom and Vanguard circled them, whining softly as the barn burned to embers, its skeleton glowing against the desert sky. Jack didn't move, didn't care about the herd or the cartel. Only Blaze mattered, this dog who'd faced hell to save what Jack loved. He'd trained them all for war, but this wasn't war. This was home, and losing Blaze would gut him deeper than any bullet ever could. Headlights sliced through the darkness as a truck screeched to a halt. Sarah Sullivan, his daughter, leaping out with her medical bag slung over her shoulder. Her hazel eyes widened at the wreckage, then locked on Jack and Blaze. "Dad!" she called, dropping beside them, her trauma nurse instincts kicking in. She pulled out bandages, saline, and a syringe, her hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. What happened? Jack couldn't speak, just held Blaze tighter as Sarah worked, flushing the burns and wrapping the leg. "He went in, saved the cattle," he finally choked out. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she nodded, injecting painkillers into Blaze's flank. "He's tough, Dad. I can stabilize him, but he won't fight again, not like this." The words hit like a sledgehammer. Jack stared at Blaze, the dog who'd once torn through smugglers' lines with fearless abandon, now reduced to a trembling wreck in his arms. Sarah's hands paused, brushing Blaze's head gently. "He's still here. We'll get him through this." Her voice softened, a flicker of hope piercing the despair. Jack clung to it, nodding as tears fell freely now, unashamed. "You hear that, boy? You're staying with me." Tom Rivera arrived minutes later, his truck kicking up dust as he ran to Jack's side. "They hit me too. Torched my shed," he said, breathless. "Same wolf mark painted on the ruins. This was them, Jack. Payback for you holding out." Jack's gaze hardened, the grief sharpening into resolve. "They want us broken. They won't get it." But inside, doubt gnawed. Blaze's sacrifice, Henry's betrayal, how much more could he lose before the valley crumbled? As Sarah loaded Blaze into her truck for emergency care, Jack stood, wiping his face with a soot-streaked sleeve. The barn was gone, half his herd scattered, and the cartel's message rang clear: no one was safe. Phantom pressed against him, Vanguard at his heel, their presence a lifeline in the wreckage. He had a choice: fortify what remained or strike back before they came again. But with Blaze down, the odds tilted against him, and the wolf's shadow loomed larger than ever. Tom gripped his shoulder, voice low. "We need you, Jack, but you can't do this alone, not now." Jack didn't reply, his eyes fixed on the dying embers. Alone or not, he'd fight, for Blaze, for the valley, for the man he'd buried under years of ranch dust. The specter who never backed down. The midday sun beat down on Dusty Hollow Ranch, its harsh light exposing the charred skeleton of the cattle barn like a wound against the desert landscape. Jack Sullivan stood amidst the ashes, his boots crunching on blackened timber, the acrid scent of smoke still clinging to the air. Phantom and Vanguard flanked him, their alert forms a stark contrast to the stillness of the ruins, while Blaze rested in Sarah's truck, sedated and bandaged, a silent survivor of the cartel's wrath. Jack's gray eyes traced the horizon, searching for answers in the shimmering heat, but all he found was the weight of loss, of the barn, of Blaze's strength, of the trust fractured by Henry Brooks' betrayal. The valley was slipping through his fingers, and he felt every inch of it. Sarah emerged from the truck, wiping her hands on a rag stained with antiseptic and blood. "He'll live, Dad," she said, her voice steady but tired. "The leg's bad. Burns went deep and the bones fractured, but he'll walk again eventually. Not like before, though." Jack nodded, his throat tight, unable to look at her. Blaze's whimpers still echoed in his mind, a sound that cut deeper than the fire itself. "Thanks, kid," he rasped, turning back to the wreckage. "Keep him safe. I've got work to do." Before she could reply, a familiar rumble approached. Mike Lawson's pickup, its dust trails snaking up the access road. Mike, a broad-shouldered man with a face weathered by decades of border battles, stepped out, his sharp blue eyes scanning the devastation. "Heard about the fire?" he said, clapping Jack on the shoulder. "Cartel's getting bold. Too bold." Jack met his gaze, recognizing the unspoken question. Mike wasn't just a friend. He was a lifeline to Jack's past, a fellow Border Patrol vet who'd seen Spectre in action. "They're not stopping," Jack said. "Tom's shed, Peterson's herd, now this. They're breaking us down." Mike nodded, then lowered his voice, a shadow crossing his face. "There's something you need to know, Jack. About this place." He jerked his head toward the ranch house, its modest facade hiding more than either man would admit aloud. Jack's brow furrowed, but he followed Mike inside, Phantom trailing like a ghost at his heels. The living room was sparse, wooden floors, a worn couch, a few photos of Sarah as a kid. But Mike didn't stop there. He knelt by the fireplace, prying up a loose floorboard with a pocket knife, revealing a rusted metal hatch beneath. Jack's breath caught as Mike lifted it, exposing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, though a flicker of memory stirred. Something from his last years with the patrol, buried under the rancher's life he'd built. Mike handed him a flashlight. "Go see for yourself. I'll watch the door." With a nod to Phantom, Jack descended, the air growing cool and damp as he stepped into a concrete bunker no bigger than a cell. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with dust-caked crates, rifles, grenades, comms gear, and a locked filing cabinet in the corner. It was a cache, military-grade, hidden beneath his home for God knows how long. He pried open a crate, revealing a Beretta M9 and a stack of ammo clips, the metal cold against his fingers. Then he turned to the cabinet, smashing the lock with the flashlight's butt. Inside were yellowed folders, their edges curling with age, stamped with the Border Patrol seal. Jack pulled one free, flipping it open, and froze. Operation Dust Veil, 2010. A mission he'd led, a night raid on a Sonora smuggling ring. The report detailed the takedown, 12 hostiles neutralized, drugs seized, a win for the agency. But the next page told the rest. 3 civilians caught in the crossfire, a family hiding in a shack, dead by stray rounds from his team. No charges filed, no public record, just a quiet suspension and a reinstatement after the dust settled. Jack's hands shook as he read his own signature at the bottom, the ink a ghost of the man he'd been. Mike's voice drifted down. "You remember now, don't you? This ranch was a black site, off-the-books surveillance, a staging point for ops like Dust Veil. They buried it when you retired, but the gear stayed. And those files? Leverage, Jack. If the cartel finds this, they'll turn you into the villain, paint you as a rogue killer, not a hero." Jack climbed back up, slamming the hatch shut, his face a mask of stone. "Why tell me now?" Mike leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Because they're asking about you. Specifics. Someone's feeding them more than Henry's scraps. They might already know." The words landed like a punch. Jack's past wasn't just a shadow, it was a weapon, and if the cartel wielded it, Dusty Hollow wouldn't just burn, it'd be his grave. Phantom growled softly, sensing the shift, and Jack ran a hand through his fur, grounding himself. "They won't find it," he said, but doubt gnawed at him. Could Henry have stumbled onto this? Or was there another traitor, someone from his old life? That evening, the cartel struck again. Phantom's bark jolted Jack from the porch, and he grabbed his pistol as 3 figures slipped through the western fence line, their silhouettes darting toward the house. "Vanguard, flank, Phantom, with me!" he snapped, moving low through the dusk. The dogs executed their roles with lethal grace, Vanguard cutting off retreat, Phantom tracking the intruder's scent. Jack caught one, a wiry man with a cartel tattoo on his neck, pinning him to the dirt. "Who sent you?" he growled, pressing the barrel to the man's temple. The captive spat, grinning through bloodied teeth. "El Coyote knows you, Spectre. Says you're a dead man walking." Jack zip-tied him as Phantom subdued the others, their curses muffled by the dog's controlled holds. He dragged them to the shed, locking them inside, then radioed Sheriff Laura Bennett. "Got 3 trespassers, cartel, send a car." Her voice crackled back, sharp with suspicion. "You're piling up bodies, Jack. Feds'll want answers soon." He didn't reply, ending the call with a click. Answers were a luxury he couldn't afford, not when the bunker's secrets loomed beneath his feet. Sarah approached as he returned, her eyes searching his. "Dad, what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." Jack forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just old habits, kid. Stay with Blaze tonight. I need you both safe." She frowned, unconvinced, but nodded. Alone again, Jack stared at the floor where the hatch hid, the file's weight pressing on his soul. Dust Veil wasn't just a mistake. It was a scar, and now it threatened to bleed again. Was he still Spectre, the protector, Or had he always been a killer waiting to be exposed? The twilight draped Santa Rosa Valley in a shroud of purple and gray, the desert air cooling as shadows stretched long across Dusty Hollow Ranch. Jack Sullivan stood on the porch, his weathered hands gripping the railing, the weight of the past day pressing down like a storm cloud. The charred remains of the barn loomed in the distance, a silent testament to Blaze's sacrifice, while the bunker's secrets churned beneath his feet, a ticking bomb he couldn't disarm. Phantom and Vanguard sat at his side, their sleek forms poised for action, but their stillness mirrored his own, a tense calm before the inevitable. Sarah had taken Blaze to her makeshift clinic in the guest room, her quiet determination a lifeline Jack clung to amidst the chaos. The radio crackled, shattering the quiet. "Jack, it's Tom. They've got Danny." Tom Rivera's voice trembled, raw with terror. "Left a video at my gate. My grandson, tied up, crying for me. They want you, Jack. Said if you don't come, he's dead." Jack's blood turned to ice, his grip tightening until his knuckles whitened. Danny Rivera, 13, freckled, all skinny limbs and bravado, was family to this valley, a kid who'd trailed Jack's dogs with wide-eyed awe. "Play it," Jack said, his tones steel. A pause, then Tom's shaky breath carried through. "It's bad. He's begging. Mr. Jack, please, help. Wolf marks on the wall behind him." Jack's mind raced as he motioned Phantom to the fence line, the dog's black form vanishing into the dusk to scout. "Where'd they leave it?" he asked. "Mailbox half a mile out," Tom replied. "I'm coming to you. Gonna trade myself for him." Jack's voice sharpened. "No, Tom, you move, they'll kill you both. Stay put. I'll handle this." He ended the call, turning to Vanguard. "Guard the house." The dog's amber eyes locked on his, understanding the weight of the command, and took position by the door. Minutes later, Tom's truck roared up the drive, dust billowing as he stumbled out, a pistol glinting in his hand, one Jack recognized from the bunker's cache. "I'm not waiting, Jack!" Tom shouted, his face a mask of desperation. "That's my blood out there!" Jack stepped forward, blocking his path, voice low but firm. "You think they'll trade fair? They'll take you, kill Danny, and burn your place to ash. You're playing their game." Tom's eyes blazed, the gun trembling as he pointed it at Jack's chest. "And you're what? Gonna save him with your damn dogs? If he dies, it's on you." The standoff stretched taut, the air thick with mistrust. Phantom returned, a low growl rumbling as he positioned himself between Jack and Tom, sensing the threat. Jack didn't flinch, his gaze steady. "Put it down, Tom. That's not yours to use, not like this." Tom's hand shook, tears streaking his dust-caked cheeks, until the pistol dropped to the dirt with a dull thud. "You don't get it," he choked. "He's all I've got left since Maria passed." Jack's chest tightened. Tom's wife, gone 3 years from cancer, had left him clinging to Danny like a lifeline. "I get it," Jack said softly. "But we do this smart, or we lose him for good." Sarah emerged, her face paling at the scene. "What's happening?" she demanded, stepping between them. Jack nodded toward Tom. "Cartel's got Danny. Wants me in exchange." Her eyes widened, but she squared her shoulders. "Then we get him back. I'm coming with you. Trauma kit's ready." Jack shook his head. "Too dangerous, Sarah." She glared, fierce as her mother once was. "He's a kid, Dad. If he's hurt, you'll need me. Don't argue. I'm not staying behind." Before Jack could respond, Henry Brooks' truck rolled up, his lanky frame slumping as he climbed out. The ranchers froze, suspicion crackling like static. "I heard about Danny," Henry said, voice small. "I want to help make this right." Tom lunged, grabbing Henry's collar. "You sold us out, you bastard. This is your fault." Jack pulled him apart, his grip iron. "Enough. Henry, you're done here. Go home." Henry's eyes pleaded. "They threatened my girl again today. I didn't tell them more, I swear. Let me fight with you." Jack studied him, the traitor who'd cracked their defenses, now begging for redemption. Trust was a currency he couldn't spare, not after the barn, not with Danny's life on the line. "Stay out of my way," he said, turning back to Tom and Sarah. "We move tonight. Hit their base. Get Danny before they expect it." Tom wiped his face, nodding. "Where?" Jack's mind flashed to the wolf marks, the captive's taunts about El Coyote, old mining complex south of the valley. It's their hub. I've tracked enough of their kind to know. The plan took shape. Jack and the dogs would infiltrate, Sarah on standby with medical gear, Tom as a decoy at the front gate, but doubt gnawed at Jack. Henry's presence, Tom's desperation, the bunker's secrets. Could he trust anyone? Phantom's bark cut through his thoughts, sharp and urgent, drawing his gaze to the western fence. A figure darted through the brush, too fast for a scout, too deliberate for an animal. Jack sprinted after it, Phantom at his heels, tackling the intruder in a tangle of limbs and dust. It was a kid cartel runner, no older than Danny, a radio clutched in his hand. El Coyote says you're next, Spectre, he spat, defiance masking fear. Jack zip-tied him, snatching the radio as it crackled with static. Then a voice. Ghost handler, surrender by dawn or the boy bleeds. Jack's blood ran cold. Dawn was 6 hours away, and that voice knew him, not just his name, but his soul. He handed the kid to Tom. Lock him in the shed, we've got no time. Back on the porch, Jack faced his ragged crew. Tom's fury, Sarah's resolve, Henry's guilt. The valley was a powder keg, and Danny was the spark. We hit them hard, he said, voice ablade, but if this goes south, it's on me. Tom glared, fists clenched. It's already on you, Jack. You don't save him, his blood's yours. The words stung, but Jack didn't flinch. He'd carry that weight, he always had. Phantom pressed against him, a steady anchor as Jack stared into the night. The cartel wasn't just testing him, they were dismantling him, piece by piece. And with every move that wolf shadow grew clearer, a specter from his past he couldn't outrun. The desert night swallowed Dusty Hollow Ranch as Jack Sullivan gathered his team under the dim glow of a single lantern, its flickering light casting long shadows across their faces. The clock was ticking, 5 hours until dawn, 5 hours until the cartel's deadline turned Danny Rivera's pleas into silence. Jack's gray eyes burned with focus, his voice a low growl as he outlined the plan. Old mining complex south of the valley. Tom, you're the decoy at the main gate. Sarah, perimeter with the med kit. Phantom and Vanguard hit the interior with me. We get Danny out before they know we're there. Tom Rivera nodded, his hands steady despite the fear etched into his weathered face, while Sarah slung her trauma bag over her shoulder, her jaw set with defiance. Henry Brooks lingered at the edge, silent, uninvited but present. Jack checked Phantom's tactical harness, a miniaturized camera strapped to the dog's chest, then ran a hand through Vanguard's sleek fur, their readiness a silent pact forged through years of ops. Blaze rested inside, Sarah's care keeping him alive, but his absence gnawed at Jack, a wound as raw as the burns on his leg. Move out, Jack said, leading them to the trucks. The drive to the mining complex was a blur of dust and tension, the radio's static a haunting echo of El Coyote's. Jack's mind raced, dust veils ghosts, Henry's betrayal, the wolf symbol, all converging on this moment. They reached the staging area, an abandoned ranger post 3 miles from the target, under a moonless sky. Tom climbed into his truck, gripping the wheel like a lifeline. I'll draw them out. Yell for Danny, make them think I'm alone, he said, voice thick. Jack clapped his shoulder. Stick to the plan. 10 minutes, then you pull back. Tom nodded, driving off toward the gate, his taillights fading into the dark. Sarah set up her station behind a boulder, her flashlight glinting off scalpels and bandages. Bring him back alive, Dad, she whispered. Jack didn't reply. Words felt hollow against the stakes. He and the dogs slipped through the scrub, Phantom's stealth carving a path to the service tunnel, Vanguard a hulking shadow at his flank. The complex loomed ahead, rusted machinery and crumbling concrete, lit by floodlights that buzzed like angry wasps. Jack's night vision gear painted the world green as Phantom nosed the tunnel entrance, a rusty grate yielding under his hands. Inside, the air was damp and stale, the dog's camera feed flickering on Jack's wrist display. Corridors, guards, a maze of cartel control. Tom's voice boomed from the gate, raw and desperate. "Give me my grandson! I'm here, take me instead!" Shouts answered, boots pounding as guards shifted toward the front, buying Jack precious seconds. Phantom darted ahead, his feed revealing the detention area. Western section, underground. There, tied to a chair, was Danny, his freckled face pale under a bruised cheek. A wolf mark scrawled on the wall behind him. Jack's heart lurched as the boy's voice crackled through the audio, small but defiant. "Grandpa's coming, you'll see." Then the feed shifted, a glint of metal, wires snaking from Danny's wrist to a crude device on the floor. A bomb. Jack's breath stopped, every instinct screaming as Phantom signaled danger with a low whine. "Sarah, we've got a problem," he hissed into his comms. "He's wired. Move or he blows." Her reply was sharp, professional. "Distance, trigger, or timer?" Jack squinted at the feed. Red digits blinked. 4:58, 4:57. Timer. 5 minutes, now 4:50. Sarah cursed. "You can't cut it blind. Get me in there." Jack shook his head, unseen. "No time. I'm doing it." He slipped into the detention room, Phantom at his side, Vanguard guarding the door. Danny's eyes widened, recognition breaking through fear. "Mr. Jack?" he whispered, voice trembling. Jack forced a calm he didn't feel, kneeling by the chair. "Hey kid, we're getting out, stay still." The bomb was a mess of wires and duct tape, a cartel special, crude but deadly. Sweat beaded on Jack's brow as he pulled a knife, tracing the tangle, red, blue, green. Each a gamble, 342, 341. Danny's breath hitched. "I don't want to die, Mr. Jack." "You won't," Jack said, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Phantom pressed against him, a silent anchor as Jack sliced the blue wire. Nothing. 219, redneck still ticking. Green remained the last shot. "Danny, close your eyes," he murmured, cutting it as the timer hit 103. Silence swallowed the room, the digits frozen at 102. Jack exhaled, a ragged sound, and slashed Danny's ropes, pulling him into his arms. The boy clung to him, sobbing into his shoulder. "I knew you'd come." "You're like my second grandpa." The words cracked Jack open, tears stinging as he held Danny tight, the weight of every lost soul from Dustville lifting just a fraction. "Let's go home, kid," he whispered, voice breaking. Phantom nudged them toward the exit, his camera catching movement, guards closing in, alerted by the quiet. Jack scooped Danny up, sprinting through the tunnel as Vanguard snarled behind, buying time with a controlled clash of teeth and muscle. Gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off concrete, but Jack didn't stop, his legs burning as he burst into the night. Sarah met them at the rally point, her flashlight sweeping Danny's bruised face. "Dehydrated, shaken, no major injuries," she said, wrapping him in a blanket as Tom's truck screeched up. "Danny!" Tom cried, tumbling out to engulf the boy in a bear hug, tears streaming. Jack stepped back, chest heaving, as Phantom and Vanguard regrouped, blood flecking Vanguard's muzzle but their discipline intact. Sarah grabbed his arm, eyes fierce. "You cut a live bomb with a kid strapped to it? Are you insane?" Jack managed a weak grin. "Had to, kid. He's worth it." Tom turned, gratitude warring with exhaustion. "You saved him, Jack. I was wrong. I'm sorry." Jack nodded, too drained to speak, but the rift between them lingered, a scar yet to heal. Danny clutched his blanket, voice small. "They asked about your dogs. Said they'd kill 'em next." Jack's gut twisted. Phantom and Vanguard stood ready, but Blaze's absence loomed large. The cartel wasn't done, and El Coyote was still out there, watching. Hope flickered in Danny's rescue, a light piercing the dark, but Jack knew the cost. Every second of that countdown had carved into him, a reminder of what he could lose. The valley wasn't safe yet, and neither was he. The desert air hung heavy with the scent of dust and gunpowder as Jack Sullivan crouched in the shadows of the abandoned quarry 3 miles south of Santa Rosa Valley. Dawn was still hours away, but the horizon glowed faintly with the cartel's activity. Floodlights slicing through the night, engines rumbling, voices barking orders. Danny Rivera's rescue had struck a blow, but it had also lit a fuse. Jack's radio crackled with Sheriff Laura Bennett's voice. "They're mobilizing. 40 men, heavy gear, crossing the border now. Dawn assault on the valley, Jack. They're coming for blood." His jaw tightened, gray eyes narrowing as he studied the staging area through his optics. Victor El Rey, Salazar's command post, a fortress of chaos preparing to crush his home. Phantom lay beside him, the dog's black coat blending with the darkness, his tactical camera humming softly. Vanguard flanked his other side, muscles coiled, ready to strike. Blaze's absence ached like a phantom limb, but Sarah's care kept him alive back at Dusty Hollow, a fragile hope Jack clung to. Tom Rivera and Sarah waited at the rally point with Danny, their reunion a fleeting victory now overshadowed by the cartel's wrath. Jack's team, Mike Lawson, Ramirez, and Chen, old Border Patrol hands, huddled nearby, their faces grim. "They'll hit every ranch that fought back," Mike said, voice low. "Scorched earth to prove a point." Jack nodded, his decision solidifying. "We don't wait. We hit them now. Cut the head off the snake." The plan was reckless, born of necessity. Phantom would infiltrate, mapping the command center. Vanguard would lock the perimeter, trapping escape routes. Jack and the team would disrupt comms and weapons caches, targeting Salazar himself. "High risk," Ramirez warned, adjusting his gear. "They've got Casadros, elite squad. Numbers alone could bury us." Jack's gaze didn't waver. "They're bunched up, prepping. That's our window. Hit them before they deploy." Chen smirked, loading a charge. "Just like old times, Spectre." Jack didn't smile. Old times had cost too much already. Phantom moved first, a shadow slipping through the outer ring of guards. Predictable patrols, fixed posts, sloppy for a force this size. His camera feed flickered on Jack's wrist. Tents, crates of rifles, a comms hub buzzing with radios. At the center, a reinforced trailer glowed, surrounded by cazardos in tactical vests. Then Jack saw him. Victor Salazar. El Rey, stepping from an SUV, his silver hair glinting under the lights, a king surveying his army. Jack's pulse quickened. This was the man who'd ordered Danny's abduction, who'd burned his barn, who'd turned Henry Brooks into a traitor. The Wolf's master. "Phase 1 go," Jack whispered into his comms. Mike and Chen darted toward the generators, planting charges with surgical precision, while Jack signaled Phantom, "Infiltration protocol, command center." The dog navigated the camp, dodging boots and barrels, his feed revealing Salazar barking orders. "Reyes thinks he's won. At dawn, we take his valley. Every inch, every soul." A chill ran through Jack. Salazar knew his name, not just Spectre's legend. The wolf wasn't a symbol, it was a vendetta. The first explosion rocked the quarry, the primary generator erupting in a shower of sparks, plunging half the camp into darkness. Shouts erupted as guards scrambled, their focus outward, expecting a frontal assault. Jack signaled Vanguard, "Exit routes." The dog surged forward, a silent predator cutting off retreat paths, his growls scattering stragglers. Mike's voice crackled, comms hubs down. Second charge hit clean. Chaos bloomed, cartel forces fracturing under the sudden blitz. Jack's specialty honed on border nights long past. He advanced, Phantom guiding him to the trailer through a storm of confusion. Guards fired blindly into the dark, but Jack moved like a wraith, pistol steady as he dropped two with precise shots, non-lethal, aimed to cripple, not kill. Dustvale's ghosts whispered in his ears, but he shoved them aside. This wasn't vengeance, it was survival. Phantom reached the trailer's vent, too small for a man but perfect for a dog bred for infiltration. Jack attached a disorientation device, sonic pulses, non-lethal chaos, and Phantom slipped inside, triggering it with a paw. Screams erupted within, the cazadors staggering as the device scrambled their senses, ears ringing, vision blurring. Jack breached through a side panel, pistol raised, Phantom at his heels. The trailer's interior was a blur of overturned maps and flickering screens, Salazar's elite guards clutching their heads. Jack moved fast, disarming them with strikes honed over decades. zip-tying their wrists as Phantom snarled, keeping them down. Then he faced Salazar, the kingpin standing alone by a desk, his dark eyes glinting with recognition. "Ghost handler," Salazar said, voice smooth despite the chaos, a pistol dangling in his hand. "You're persistent, I'll give you that." Jack stepped closer, Phantom growling low. "Release the Valley, El Rey. You've lost." Salazar laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Lost? I control 3 states. This is a speck. But you? I know you, Sullivan. Dustvale, 10.U, gunned down a family to get your targets. We're not so different, you and me." The words hit like a blade, twisting in Jack's gut, Dustvale's screams echoing anew. "I didn't mean," he started, but Salazar cut him off. "Intent doesn't erase blood. You're a killer, Spectre, just like me." Jack's hand tightened on his gun, doubt flickering. Salazar's taunt wasn't wrong, but it wasn't all. "You took a kid," he said, voice steadying. "I don't target innocents to prove a point." Salazar smirked, raising his weapon, but Phantom lunged, jaws clamping his wrist, forcing the gun to clatter free. Jack tackled him, pinning him to the floor as the cazadores groaned, helpless. "You're done," Jack said, securing him with ties, his breath ragged. Salazar's eyes narrowed. "This isn't over. El Coyote knows your secrets, your bunker. You'll fall yet." The name jolted Jack. El Coyote, the voice on the radio, the shadow behind the wolf. Before he could press further, Mike's voice burst through. "Feds inbound, 6 minutes, Valley's holding, cartels scattering." Jack stood, dragging Salazar up as Phantom guarded him. Outside, Vanguard's containment had turned escape routes into traps, cartel forces flailing as federal lights crested the horizon. Jack's strike had worked. Command crippled, chaos sown. But Salazar's words lingered, a venom seeping into his victory. Laura Bennett's cruiser rolled in as Jack emerged, Salazar in tow. "You've got a hell of a mess," she said, eyeing the scene. "Feds will take it from here. Rico case, big time." Jack nodded, handing Salazar over, but his gaze drifted south. "El Coyote's still out there," he muttered. Laura frowned. "Someone you know?" Jack didn't answer. Couldn't. Dustvale's scars, the bunker's files, the wolf, all pointed to a past he'd buried, now clawing free. Phantom pressed against him, a steady presence as Jack watched the feds swarm. The valley was safe, for now, but El Coyote's threat hung like a noose, tightening with every unanswered question. The first rays of dawn spilled over Santa Rosa Valley, painting the jagged foothills in streaks of gold and pink, a fragile beauty rising from the night's chaos. Jack Sullivan stood on the porch of Dusty Hollow Ranch, his weathered hands resting on the railing, the cool morning air washing away the lingering sting of smoke and blood. Victor El Rey? Salazar sat in federal custody, his command shattered by Jack's desperate strike, and the valley's ranchers breathed free for the first time in weeks. Phantom and Vanguard lay at his feet, their sleek forms relaxed yet watchful, while Blaze limped from the house, his bandaged leg a quiet testament to survival. Jack's gray eyes softened as he scratched the dog's ears, a rare smile tugging at his lips. They'd made it, somehow. Sarah emerged from the kitchen, a mug of coffee in each hand, her hazel eyes bright despite the exhaustion lining her face. "Blaze is healing faster than I expected," she said, handing Jack a cup. "He'll never chase smugglers again, but he'll chase rabbits soon enough." Jack took the mug, warmth seeping into his calloused fingers. "Good enough for me," he murmured, gazing at the trio of dogs. His partners, his family, the cost had been high. The barn gone, Blaze scarred, trust with Tom Rivera frayed. But Danny's rescue and Salazar's fall made it worth every scar. Tom's truck rumbled up the drive, Danny bouncing out with a grin, a rolled-up paper clutched in his hand. Tom followed, slower, his weathered face softer now, the fury of their standoff replaced by gratitude. "Morning, Jack," Tom said, tipping his hat. "Feds say the cartel's pulling back. Too much heat after last night. Danny wanted to see you." The boy darted forward, thrusting the paper at Jack. "I drew this for you and the dogs," he said, voice shy but proud. Jack unrolled it. A crayon sketch of him standing tall, phantom blaze and vanguard at his side, a wolf shadow fading in the background. "Your heroes," Danny added, eyes shining. "Saved me." Jack's throat tightened, the simple lines cutting deeper than any medal he'd earned. He knelt, meeting Danny's gaze. "You're the tough one, kid. Kept your head in there." Danny beamed, then hugged him, a quick, fierce embrace that Jack returned, blinking back tears. Tom watched, a faint smile breaking through. "I was wrong to doubt you, Jack. Blood don't mean nothing if you ain't got trust. We're square." Jack stood, nodding. Square. The rift wasn't gone, but it was mending, thread by thread. Sheriff Laura Bennett arrived next, her cruiser kicking up dust as she stepped out, uniform crisp despite the long night. "Feds indicted Salazar. RICO charges, decades worth," she said, leaning against the hood. "His lieutenant Morales? El Coyote. He's singing to prosecutors, spilling everything. Valley's secure, Jack, thanks to you." Jack's brow furrowed at the name. "Morales? Luis Morales?" Laura nodded. "You know him?" Jack's mind flashed Dustvale, a young smuggler he'd let walk after a raid, a kid with a wolf tattoo on his wrist. "Yeah," he said, voice distant. "I did." The realization hit like a freight train. El Coyote wasn't just a shadow. He was a ghost Jack had spared, a debt turned into vengeance. Morales had known Dustvale, the bunker, Spectre's every move, not from intel, but from memory. Jack's mercy had bred this war, and the irony twisted in his gut. Laura studied him, sensing the shift. "He mentioned a cache. Said you've got something buried here. Feds'll sniff around eventually." Jack's face hardened. "Nothing to find," he lied. The hatch beneath the floor, a secret he'd guard to his last breath. Tom and Danny drove off, the boy waving until they vanished around the bend. Laura lingered, her voice low. "You're a legend now, Jack. Valley owes you everything, but legends draw eyes. Stay sharp." She left, her warning hanging in the air, and Jack turned to Sarah. "You heading back to Tucson?" he asked. She shook her head, setting her mug down. "Not yet. Someone's got to keep an eye on you in these mutts." Her grin was a lifeline, a promise of normalcy he hadn't dared hope for. The day unfolded quietly. Jack tended the scattered cattle, Sarah checked Blaze's bandages, the dogs patrolled with a rhythm unbroken by the night's violence. By afternoon, a group approached. Tom, James Peterson, Ron Taylor. Faces hardened with purpose. "We're setting up a Valley network," Tom said, spreading a map on the picnic table. "Radios, patrols. Learned it from you. Want to weigh in?" Jack studied the map, then offered tweaks, choke points, signal lines, his expertise a gift to the community he'd fought for. "You've got this," he said, stepping back. They nodded, respect in their eyes, and left to build what he'd started. Dusk settled, the sky bruising purple as Jack sat on the porch, coffee cold in his hands. The radio crackled, an encrypted line he hadn't touched since Border Patrol days. A voice hissed through, distorted but chilling. "Spectre, this ain't over. We know your bunker, your sins. Watch your back." The line died, leaving silence thick with menace. Jack's pulse quickened. Morales? Another player? The wolf wasn't dead. It was waiting. He stood, gazing at the valley, Phantom pressing against his leg, Vanguard and Blaze alert beside him. The bunker's files, Dustvale's blood, lay beneath. A Pandora's box he could destroy or wield. Burn them and he'd bury his past, live clean. Keep them and he'd arm himself for the next fight, a guardian in the shadows. The choice gnawed at him, unresolved, a thread dangling into the unknown. Danny's drawing rested on the table, a child's faith in crayon lines. Jack as hero, dogs as saviors. It anchored him, a flicker of hope amidst the storm. The valley was his now, not just to live in, but to protect. Its people no longer prey, but a force forged in fire. Yet the voice on the radio promised more wolves, more shadows, more ghosts. Jack sipped his coffee, the bitter taste grounding him as the stars emerged. Blaze limped closer, resting his head on Jack's knee, and Phantom's eyes glinted with quiet strength. Whatever came, they'd face it, together. The desert stretched endless before him, peaceful yet pregnant with secrets, and Jack knew this wasn't the end. It was a beginning, fragile and fierce, a dawn bought with blood and loyalty.